And welcome once again to another edition of Footnotes. I am joined today with my friend. Can I say old friend?
Yeah.
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
It's been over 20 years.
I have my class ring on, 1995, Mid-America Baptist Church.
Oh, man. Yes. Bob Freudiger with Calvary Rescue Mission, a rescue mission that is located in downtown Memphis, Tennessee, and a rescue mission that's been an integral part of Broadway Baptist Church, and Broadway has been an integral part of Calvary Rescue Mission. So since they're one of the ministries we support, one of the mission ministries that we not only financially and prayerfully support, but we actually go and do ministry at, we said, hey, we've got all these new members. Wouldn't it be great for our new members to hear from the director of the rescue mission, get to know him, get to hear his heart, and learn more about this so that they can more effectively love and minister to you guys and what you're doing. So welcome, Bob Freudiger.
Thank you.
Director of Calvary Rescue Mission. Now, Brother Bob, how long have you been at the Calvary Rescue Mission?
This is my 28th year, so if I survive
and you're
this
only
year,
29,
yeah.
so...
Yeah, I was still in diapers when I started.
Yeah. So you went to Mid-America Baptist, as I did. We were all alumni there, and God called you while you were at seminary. You knew you wanted to go into the ministry, but Calvary Rescue Mission became a viable option.
That's right. You know, kind of, I think it's a funny story, but during seminary, there were, over on Poplar, in the old Jewish temple there was a prayer room. And I would go in that prayer room and usually be the only one in there. And rather than write a church resume, I just said, I'm going to just pray about this. And I was asking God to be in an inner city ministry where I could work with men, because I'd been in a type of industry with, always worked with men. And I asked that I could preach to lost people. And so a couple of weeks before I graduated, buddy of mine, he said, hey, man, get down here to Calvary Rescue Mission. They're interviewing for a new director, Milton Hatcher, who had been the founder and director for 28 years. He had passed away. So, yeah, this was in 1995. He died, I think, August 1995. And so I was fixing to graduate in December of 95 at Mid-America Seminary. And he said, man, bring your resume and get down to Calvary. And I said, well, I don't have a resume. He said, well, throw something together and get down there, So my brother was at U of M at the time, and he said, I'll help you out. Let's put a resume together. And we threw something together, like my friend said. And later, after I got the job, they told me the resume was the worst thing they'd ever seen.
See, I thought, and that's the funny part of the story, I thought you were going to say something like, since I didn't have a resume, I put on a piece of cardboard, we'll work for food, and went down to the rescue mission, and they mistook me for, all right. Well,
it was almost like that.
That could have been a really funny way to get your name in the door, but worst resume that they'd ever seen.
And I think there was 3 candidates for the position, and I was third choice, and somehow the Lord just worked it out. And, my wife and I had prayed about it, and so I started at Calvary January 2nd, 1996. Calvary just celebrated 56 years, so add those two 28s together. We just celebrated 56 years of ministry. The location that we're at now, Channel 10 Memphis said it was the first place Elvis Presley sang publicly.
I've heard that before, because it used to be a church.
Right. It was First Assembly many years ago. And we're
on 3rd Street.
And next door to what was the 3rd Holiday Inn ever built. And so Holiday Inn had bought the old church building. They were storing hotel equipment in it. Then when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated about a mile from the mission in 1968, the building there, sat in disarray for a couple of years. And then Kimmons Wilson and his group donated the building to Calvary Rescue Mission. And Calvary moved in April 1st, 1972. And then, as I said, Brother Milton Hatcher and his wife Betty, co-founders, operated the mission. Miss Hatcher's still with us. She's our Director of Finance and Development. But Calvary Rescue Mission, it is a homeless shelter for men. It's a gospel homeless shelter, meaning that our main goal is to see men come to know the Lord Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. And we have a chapel service every night, and of course Broadway has been a part of that. And I've had the privilege since being there to come down to Broadway for mission conferences over the years. And when Bobby Moore was pastor here, got to know him, and he was such a blessing to us. And then later Tim Lampley, and now you. So quite a legacy here and at Broadway and North Point Christian School. So it's been an incredible journey and continues to be. I did want to say, as we were talking earlier before the podcast, that just yesterday we demolished the building that housed the ministry from April 1st, 1972 until about 5 years ago when we built a new building. By the grace of God, it's all paid for. But we tore down our old building, and we are in the process of developing the plans to build a new building. We've raised $1.8 million, and we have hired an architect, a gentleman named Tony Pelliciotti. His parents go to Central Church in Collierville, just a fine Christian guy. He's with Looney Rick's Kiss, and they did the Crosstown building, and I think Tony was kind of headed that up, the Sears Crosstown building, which is, just garnered national acclaim. So we're excited about the new chapel that's going to be coming up. It'll be a dedicated place to worship God. We've been meeting in our dining room, and you know how that goes. Mm-hmm. It's great. Mm-hmm.
But it'll be nice to get out of the cafeteria and go back. Yeah. So real quick, let's go back just a little bit. So when Milton Hatcher and Betty said we want to start a rescue mission, I didn't know that about Holiday Inn's founder, Mr. Wilson, giving you guys. That's an incredible story. But they wanted to reach men who are on the street in Memphis.
That's right. And just a real quick, interesting story about that as well. Milton Hatcher had been a barber across from Central High School, and he was sort of notorious. He had a back room there, and no telling what all went on back there. He contributed to the delinquency of a lot of minors, I think. But Milton Hatcher, I think some Baptist deacons came by to visit him one night, and he received Christ. And Milton said, I worked really hard for the devil, and I'm going to work twice as hard for God. And he made good on it, I think. But Brother Milton, he told his wife Betty, I think they had tried to go overseas and it didn't work out. So Brother Milton told his wife Betty, he said, I'm going to go back in this little shed behind the house, and I'm going to pray until God tells me what he wants me to do. And according to Betty, he was out there a couple of days. And eventually he came back in, and he said, God wants me to start a rescue mission. So they started one at several different locations, and I think one might have been on Jackson Street, and I believe that they were next door to a place called Jesse's Lounge, and so they would have chapel and turn their speakers way up, and so the people over in the bar could hear it. And Milton, they had a place where he stayed sometimes up above the bar to sleep at night. And so it was funny because Milton said that was the first time in his life he'd lived above sin, But they, so it's interesting the way that God worked in Milton's heart and Betty's heart and got the mission started.
Absolutely. And so they began. And just to be clear, something you said earlier, too, that I think is very valuable. You said we are a rescue mission with the supreme goal not only to feed and house people for the night, men for the night, but to preach the gospel.
That's right.
And that sets the rescue mission apart from others in our city, because there are other missions, and nothing against them. But you and I, you remember years ago, we talked about this. long time ago. And I said, look, I'm all for all. That's great that all these other missions are out there, but Calvary Rescue Mission, that's our mission. And the reason why is because I remember you telling me a story. There was a board meeting. Do you remember this? And you, I think, were in the board meeting, and this was after maybe there was some transition, and there was a pivotal moment where people on the board were saying, we need to get away from all the church. We could take federal funding if we would just make this a rescue mission where we feed them and clothe them, and that's doing enough in Jesus' name. So let's just feed and clothe them. And the mission, though, was founded on sharing the gospel openly and freely and preaching truth. Tell me about that story. Do you remember that story?
Well, yeah, that was actually, I mentioned I was like the third place as far as a candidate to be the director of the mission. And so at that time, Brother Milton, as I said, he died, I think, around August 31st, 1995, and I came to Calvary on January 2nd, 96. So there was a few months in there that they were trying to figure out what they were going to do, and they were prayerful about that. And I think there was some board members at that time that had some kids, their own children that had had some addiction problems, and they had gone through some more programs that were more 12-step centered, AA and so forth, NA, CA, all kinds of A's. And, and they felt like, well, Calvary really, maybe we ought to go in more of a 12-step direction. And one of the candidates for the position was real strongly in that camp. And another candidate, I think he just decided he was a really good candidate, probably better than me, but he was close to retirement and decided to stick with the company he was with. And so, it was a pivotal moment for Calvary because some of the board members wanted to go more of a 12-step direction. And Miss Hatcher, she never wavered. Her and my friend Bruce Brooks, some of the other board members, they said, no, let's, we want to seek the old path. We want to stay the course. We want to keep it a gospel rescue mission, make the gospel the main point, the main emphasis. And so, it took a lot of prayer and just a lot of dedication, but God saw that through, and God blessed that, I think. And, 5 years ago, we built a brand-new building, a $3 million building, and man, just incredible to see.
Oh, it is.
The building we just demolished was almost 100 years old. We think it was built 1927. Now we're in a 5-year-old building, and I mean, it's just
it's night and day because you know that I had moved away to Texas to pastor, had been gone 16 years. So way back 20 years ago, I used to bring my youth group every first Friday night of the month to Calvary Rescue Mission. That's where Bob and I became, closer friends. And we'd come and do the food, and then we would preach the service. You remember that?
Didn't y'all graffiti our shed?
Well, that was SBEC.
Okay.
So after bringing my youth group for years to Calvary Rescue Mission, I came over to SBEC, North Point, and I was over the Bible department and over the mission classes. We had an international missions class and a home missions class, and it was my responsibility. So to teach them missions at home, I said, before we go overseas, I want you to do missions locally, and I want you to witness to people here before we go out and share the gospel to people over there. So one of the days we came to your rescue mission as a field trip, and we cleaned, and the kids that year got excited. That was 2005, Brother Bob. That class, they got excited, and they said, can we paint the outside shed? And Brother Bob said, well, I guess there's no harm in it. And so what they meant by paint was, can we write our names all over it and put our fingerprints?
Yeah.
And so Bob and I walk out because we're talking while they're out painting. We weren't going to go out there and do that. They wanted to do that. And so you and I were inside talking, and you were on a diet at the time. I don't know if you remember this, but you had this soup that you would warm up every day, and you had it down to a science on the microwave. And you would push 1 minute, 15 seconds. And you told me, you said, you want some soup? And I said, well, is that what you're eating? And you goes, yeah, I'm on this diet. I think you'd maybe just had a heart issue. Yeah. Is that right?
I had a triple bypass back then.
Okay,
yeah.
well, that's what it was. And so you were eating this healthy soup or whatever out of a can. Mm-hmm. And so you tell me 1 minute, 15 seconds. So I warm it up in the microwave. And I remember going, man, Bob, you're right. It's like the perfect temperature. You had done this every day for like months. So you had the temp down perfectly. So here you and I are eating soup. And I said, well, we better go check on the kids, make sure they're okay, because we just left them painting. And we walk out, and I'm like, oh, my. They had just taken that shed, and you remember, they put all kinds of stuff all over it. It looked like a rainbow or something had exploded. It was great. But and then I came back a month later, and y'all had painted over it.
I think the guys did that. Yeah, I thought it was kind of cool, really, and I was really disappointed when they painted over.
Well, they were probably like, this is tacky looking. We need to paint over this. Of course, those kids thought it would remain there forever.
And one of the kids was a young lady. I can't remember her first name. Her last name was Spurlock, and
Lauren Spurlock.
She was quite the golfer.
Yes,
and. It turned out that y'all had a night you came back and did chapel, I think, and her parents came with her.
That's right.
And it turned out that her dad and I knew each other from way back, had worked together, and so to this day they're still involved in our ministry and supporters of Calvary. So
wow, that's awesome. I didn't know that. I didn't know that part of the story. So very neat. And you keep talking golf, so one day you're going to have to teach me if you've got the time.
Well, you better get somebody else to teach you if you want to learn correctly. But
but you're right. The Spurlocks were big on golf, and she was, and that's right. And we came back because one of the things we would always do as a class after we did our field trip day, we would come back and do a night where the families would come. All the parents would come, and we would do the rescue mission. Mm-hmm. And so whether it was me bringing the youth group back in the day or it was bringing North Point SBC, here's what you're saying. It was in that little bitty 100-year-old building, and everything was in that little bitty 100-year-old building.
Right.
You had to go down into the basement to cook the food, and the men's beds were in the basement, and then you went upstairs above it in the little chapel.
All right.
But brother, I have such great memories from that, and I'll give you another memory. This is really precious. So in that chapel on the second row to the right, I actually had, you remember this story, you're laughing. I had brought SBC's home mission class. Yeah. We went up to Chicago to do our home missions with Betty Cherry and whatever that Baptist church was, Logan Baptist or whatever, Armitage Baptist. Yeah. So we'd gone up to Armitage Baptist, and we had come back, and we were going to end our mission trip at Calvary Rescue Mission on Sunday night, and we were going to do the food and serve. But you had said, well, it's Sunday night, and I've got a regular preacher that comes in on Sunday night. So you guys just come and enjoy the service. So all the parents show up, to pick their kid up. That's where they're going to pick them up, and they all show up. And I remember it was a cold night. It was right before Christmas because we always had to go on home missions right before Christmas, and we had to go international biblical studies over spring break so that the kids didn't miss work and all that. So here it is, Christmas, and we're singing a hymn, okay? We're at this part of the service. We're singing the third song.
It's 5 till, right?
It's the last minute of the last second before the guy is supposed to get up to preach. And I'm sitting next to this lady who is going to become my future wife. And this is when I know she's going to become my future wife. She had gone on the trip with us. She was a teacher at SBC. She's sitting beside me. And Brother Bob comes up to me. We're on the second verse of the last song before the preacher gets up to preach. And he says, Brother Mark, I don't have anybody. The preacher didn't show up. Can you preach? And I said, now? And you go, yes. And I said, well, how many more songs do I have? And you said, this is it.
It was you or me, brother.
You said, it's you or me. I'll do it, but do you want to do it? And I said, all right, I'll do it. So they finished the last verse, and I said, just pray long. Let me get my thoughts together. So Bob prays. I come up in that little chapel, and I preached. And I preached Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 to 5 or 10 or something like that. And I mean, brother, literally, I just prayed the grace of God, and I knew the text, and I just preached the text, and in a sense, under the Spirit, winged it. Mm-hmm. And when I sat down, that blonde-headed lady looks at me and whispers in my ear, man, you are anointed. And I knew at that moment, you will be my wife. When a woman compliments a man like that, it's a done deal.
Hey, we'll give God the glory, but let me get just a little tiny piece of credit there then.
Yeah, so that. Bob, you had a hand in our marriage
right.
When she said, man, you are anointed, because she thought, she heard all this. She heard you come up to me, and she heard you say, you got to preach. And so she's like, you just got up there and did all that. And I'm like, and at the time, here's another funny thing. The reason she said that, I was actually studying for the LSAT. I had decided, well, I was just struggling in my heart. Do I stay in ministry? What do I do? You know, I'm young, and I wasn't married, and I was having a hard time finding a church, and I was just like, do I even stay in this? Maybe I just need to go to law school. So I was actually looking at the LSAT, and I had told her that on this trip. And so the context of her saying that to me was she was basically saying, there's your answer. If you can get up and do that, you're anointed. You need to preach. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, well, you marry me, and you be a pastor's wife, and I'll preach. And, man, I knew from that day forward, I'm going to marry that woman. And the Lord has called me full-time, because I don't think I had pastored a church yet. I think I was doing youth pastor and SBC, spiritual life director and music minister at Hope. And, I was doing all that kind of stuff, but I hadn't yet done the preaching. And so when that happened, I was like, all right, it's a done deal. God's called me. So all in that little chapel that you just tore down, brother. Yeah. Elvis sang there. Mark got married there. No.
We've had, and I can think of at least a couple other pastors that have not the exact story, but similar stories in that God affirmed to them their direction in ministry, or that they would even stay in the ministry through Calvary. And we've also had, several young men over the years have surrendered to preach at Calvary. So it's and not just men that stayed there, but people that came in from out of town sometimes to visit and preach.
And that's what's so great about it being a place where the gospel is preached. You feed people. So if no one knows what Calvary Rescue Mission does, the basics is men can come down at what time every day?
We open our courtyard up at 3 in the afternoon, and that courtyard is so nice, in the way it's designed in the summer. The breeze comes in from the south where it's open, and in the winter, the building blocks the cold north wind. We noticed the guys would hang around certain shady areas out there, so we had benches installed where they like to hang around, make it comfortable for them. But it's a safe haven. The neighborhood we're in, has had a history of being dangerous, and although there at the mission, we've been very blessed, very fortunate not to have many problems at all. But we do open up at 3 o'clock, and the guys can come into the courtyard, and then at around 3:30 or 4, we start our intake. Dinner generally is around 5:30 for staff and visitors, and then 6:30 is chapel service. And so that's 7 days a week, and
so every night, and that's the beauty of this. So you feed them, and you give them things that there's a clothes closet. Yeah. There's even training, right? So if somebody said, well, I think you should do more training for these guys. There's classes that they can take. But here's what I love about your process, and I didn't understand this when I first came to the rescue mission. But you think rescue mission, and you think, oh, well, these guys are just hanging out at this mission all day until they get their life set. No, you don't. You close the mission at what time every morning?
Yeah, so the guys are out by 6:30 every morning.
Every morning. So they have to be out.
Yeah.
So you're closed essentially from 6:30 a.m. until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and that forces them to go out. It forces them, hopefully, to get a job or whatever. And so they can't just loaf around all day long. And so you feed them, you clothe them, you do offer classes for them and different things. But the most important thing, you give the gospel every night. And
that's right.
You invite churches and pastors, you always have, to come in 7 days a week. And you've always said, yeah, I need somebody to take the third Thursday of every month, which is Broadway's night.
Right.
And we come in and we're responsible for the service. We preach, we sing, we do all that. And so you're right. I mean, leaving and going to Texas, you were in that little 1927 building, and that's the way I remembered it. When I came back that first Christmas during COVID, I saw the new building, and I went, whoa, what happened? I mean, it was like you guys had won the lottery, and you had a mansion over the hilltop. No, but well-deserved. I mean, it was great. And I mean, what a place of ministry. When I look at what you have now and I think back to that little building, I'm like, how did you even do it in the little building? Because now, I mean, you got better shower systems for these guys. You've got better security. You've got better everything, food prep. And you see that old building and you just think, how did they do it for what? How many years? Almost 40-something years?
From 1972 until about 5 years ago, however many years that
Good
comes
night.
up to.
So, yeah, it was just amazing how God worked. And I've witnessed men come to Christ, and I've witnessed the redeeming grace of God over some of these men. Let's talk about that for a minute, because people might say, well, how are you really helping these guys? I mean, you're giving them a place to stay. You're giving them food. You're preaching to them. Does it really help, though? And I think about Sammy, who is a product of the Rescue Mission.
Right.
I think about, help me out, Chicken.
Robert.
Yes, why can I not think of his name? Who is a product of these are guys that are involved today who were in the mission 20 years ago when I would bring my teenagers. And you see them leading, you see them, God's worked in their life. Do you remember Floyd?
Yeah, Floyd Walker.
Who used to sing, "Pass Me Not, O Gentle Savior."
And his dad came down one night and sang too.
And I mean, that guy had the voice of an angel. I'm not kidding.
Well, one night, we had a big night, and he had 15 or 20 family members there, and it turned out they all sang. They were all musical. And I hope I never forget that his sister was playing the piano, and I mean, boy, we were jamming, praising God. And she really wanted to lead the singing, though. And so she slid off the piano while she was playing. Her brother slid onto the piano and continued. It's like they didn't miss a note, whatever that song was, and just kept right on going. And she started leading the singing. And gosh, we had a bunch of people saved that night. It went on. It was 2.5 hour service or something like that, but nobody even looked at the clock.
Yeah, and you get these men who are captive, and I just over the years remember incredible stories. Men would come down at the altar call, the night that I would preach. I remember one guy in particular, clean cut guy. Back then, I was in my 20s. He was about my age, and I wondered, why is he here? Why is he a resident at the mission? And I remember he came down and he said, would you pray for me? I'm here tonight. I checked myself in because I have gambled my daughter's tuition away and my house note and our grocery bill. I gambled it all away. And I'm addicted to gambling. And I know that if I stayed home tonight or whatever, I would go down to the casinos and I would lose everything. So I checked myself in here, and I need prayer. And I remember guys like that would come down, and they would be so broken. You remember the guy? We don't have to say his name, but he was a pilot. I want to say Gary.
Wayne. But
Wayne.
He's gone to be with the Lord, you know.
Okay. Wayne was a pilot and had started drug use. I want to say it was LSD, and he had a reaction, and he lost.
Yeah, he
lost all that.
He was a commercial airline pilot.
Right.
And whatever the drug he used caused him to have vertigo, and so, you know,
because he was a user, and it had those repercussions. And I remember Wayne. Yes, I don't know why I wanted to call him Gary, but Wayne would come to the mission so faithful. And just so broken, he lost everything. Here's this guy, doesn't look like what you think a rescue mission guy would look like. I mean, clean cut, well presented, but a homeless man. A homeless man. And saying, you know, Jesus is my only hope. You know, I'm here. And a lot of these guys work. That's the other thing. They're not loafing under a bridge. They work.
Well, you know, I'm glad you said that, because the Downtowner magazine, Downtown Memphis, I don't know if they still put this in every issue of their magazine, but they used to always put this saying in there: most homeless people are not panhandlers, and most panhandlers are not homeless. And there's a lot of truth in that. Most panhandlers are entrepreneurs. They are making a lot of money on these corners. And by now, most people have seen on YouTube, you know, people panhandling, then they go get in their BMW and, you know, go somewhere else. I know Barry and I met a guy on the lot one night, and he had been panhandling. He said, I have a home in Bartlett. He said, I have a car, I have a boat. But he said, I make an extra $20,000 a year panhandling. But
Bob, you want to join me today at Get Well in 240?
I mean,
let's go down there and see what we can do.
There's evidently it's quite lucrative.
Well, there's always guys right there at Get Well in 240.
Oh,
and my kids will say, Dad, you know, do they need help? And I'll tell them, because I always reference you and the rescue mission, and I say, look, son, we support the Calvary Rescue Mission. I said, we have a good place in Memphis for people like that. If they really want help, that's where they need to go. There's a system.
Yeah. And, you know, when I first started at Calvary, I didn't know any better either. And saw a guy, I think it was at Get Well an American Way. We were going over to Sam's Club, and, you know, we were in our truck that had Jesus' name all over it. And this guy had a sign, "We'll work for food." So I pulled up and said, "Hey, man, come to the mission with us, and you won't even have to work for food. We'll feed you." I can't repeat what he said to me. I mean,
that bad, huh?
And you know, I'm a slow learner, so you know, I tried that again with a different person, different corner, you know, not realizing this was a thing, and got the same or similar reaction. So yeah, I mean, and I don't think I've ever seen in 28 years or 27 and a half, however long it is, I don't think I've ever seen one of our guys panhandling. So, you know, there's just a lot of truth in that, and I know it plays on our hearts. My little grandkids are 3, 7, 8, 9, and we're going through that with them. Papa, look, there's, you know, aren't you going to help him? And I'm like you. I explained to him, you know, well, we're helping folks in a better way.
We have a place, we have a system, and that's what I've always said. Even when people will come to the church, you know, and they have all these stories, and a sure sign, because we want to be compassionate, we want to be gracious in Jesus' name. But when they have a story that can only be solved with money, and that's what I try to teach our staff, because we'd have people come to the door, and I'm like, look, okay, ask them why do they have to drive to Louisiana? Well, they have to see their family. Okay, well, how did they think they were going to get from Ohio to Louisiana with no money? And you know, then, well, you know, okay, well, tell them we'll give them food. Well, they don't need food; they need gas. Okay. Well, tell them we'll take them to get gas. Well, no, their car runs on money. Now, you know, it's always something crazy, and it always leads to the only thing that will solve my problem is cold hard cash, and that's what I need you to give me, and that's not anybody that's sincere.
You know, I was a member. I guess, a deacon at a church in West Memphis. It was right on Interstate 40 and real close to where 55 comes in there, so they're both right there. And we had a lot of travelers would stop in like that. But we had a pretty well-developed system over there. We had gas vouchers and so forth, but all this we worked through the police department. And so when somebody came in, and one of our members was a highway police over there, Eddie Boone, he was a lieutenant. And, sometimes he'd be in uniform too, but when somebody'd stop in and tell one of those stories, we'd say, hey, we'll be glad to help you get gas, get you a gas voucher or whatever you need, but we work through the police department. Where'd they go?
Yeah, they disappear. We did the same thing in Harrisburg. We had a ministerial alliance, and we would tell people who came for help, if you want help, you have to fill out this form, and we do a background check with the police department. Well, that was it. They're not going to do that. So, and that's not everybody.
Right.
We're probably sounding harsh to some people. That's not everybody. That's not every situation. But I want to go back. The men at the rescue mission, they're not out panhandling.
Right.
They are not on the street with a sign that says we'll work for food. They're taking care of, they're working jobs. Many of them are going to places of business, and they work, and they're saving their money. And people have gotten out of the rescue mission.
Yeah, and, especially prior to the pandemic, and it's kind of coming back now, but we work with some other organizations that actually have received grants to help guys get permanent housing. For example, in 2019, one of those organizations put 50 of our guys into permanent housing, which means their rent was paid for 18 months and, gives them a chance to assimilate back into society, and the hope is that they'll continue on after those 18 months. One real quick story, I don't know how much time we have left, but speaking of that, we had a guy, he's okay with me saying his name, but Angelo Pantos, and his nickname was CIA. Now, he was there a good many years. You've met him before, I'm sure. And I would get so mad at CIA because he didn't want to let anybody shake. The preacher would reach his hand out, shake his hand, and And then during the preaching, there was a kind of a greasy spot on the wall where he'd turn his head.
And I remember, and he would look at the wall, and he'd never say,
That's
I
right.
remember him.
Well, and, every time I'd say, man, we're going to, Angelo we're not helping him, he probably needs to move on. Somebody would say, Brother Bob, he was reading his Bible, last night in the dorm. I'd be like, well, maybe there's hope. Well, what happened to Angelo, that agency I spoke of, they helped him get permanent housing. He had a job at Kroger. He had bought himself a car. And about 2 weeks into, moving into his new place, he was driving to work at Kroger and got T-boned. He described it as a Christopher Reeves type accident because he became a quadriplegic. And so, he had, as far as we knew, never been receptive to the preaching and so forth. So our assistant director, Dennis Rutledge, whom we call Chief, he's a retired fire chief, we went down to Regional 1 to see Pantos. And the first thing that came out of his mouth was, I want to be saved. I want to be born again. I want to be a Christian.
Amen.
And
Wow.
Chief and I, we almost passed out. And, he had heard the gospel so many times and heard the sinner's prayer so many times that, we were just there as witnesses, and he prayed the most beautiful prayer. And I think he's still recovering in the nursing home out there in Collierville, but he's walking. They said he'd never walk again. He's walking. He can use his hands. He's still having some issues there, but we now call him the Apostle Angelo because when you go see him, you're going to get a sermon.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. Yeah. And again, it just underscores the power where the gospel is preached. That is truly how to change men and try to give them hope and help. So that's what I love about the rescue mission, because if you look up rescue missions in Memphis, there's probably one on every page of the phone book. Again, they may all be nice places, but many of them, I know some in particular, do not preach the gospel. That's not their mission. That's not what they're about. And they're the ones that get all the TV coverage at Thanksgiving. You see everybody down at that place, and they're all, look at me. I went for Thanksgiving once. And, you see it all on the news, and it's all about that. And that's when I made that comment to you. Well, I'm fine with all those other ones, but we're for Calvary Rescue Mission because they preach the gospel. Right. They're not ashamed of the gospel. And that's what I love, because now churches can be a part of that. They always have been. Yeah. So like Broadway, just for anybody listening saying, okay, that's all great. Well, what's Broadway done? Broadway's had a long connection and a long history with the mission. Just real quick, what are some ways Broadway's had that connection with you guys?
Well, one of the things that comes to mind, you were talking about, how we preach the gospel. Every year we do a thing called the Calvary Children's Christmas Celebration, and we've been doing that for a lot of years. I think they were doing it before I got there. And so what we do, we have services there for children and their families, and I think it's kids ages 2 to 12, and on that day, it's usually 2 Saturdays before Christmas. We may have the first service at 10 a.m. There'll be kids out there at 6 in the morning with their parents lined up to, they want to be first in line to get into that first service. And we'll have bags of brand new toys, only new toys. Wayne's Candy Company donates a pallet of candy or 2 usually. And those bags will be stuffed, to the top with toys and candy. And Broadway has been a big part of that. I remember many years, one year in particular, whoever was driving the SBEC bus back then came up with a load of people and with a load of toys. And we would put some bags together on the day of. Now we do all that, ahead of time. And there wasn't that many kids there. There was the few that came real early, but we took the bus and we went into the housing development behind us, Fowler Homes. And when the kids over there saw the bus, a bunch of them ran ahead of the bus and they got into the service first. Gotcha. And then the ones that came on the bus, they got in the next service. So, but Broadway has always been a big part of that. And one of the things that sets this event apart, though, is that we always preach the gospel. And from our little unscientific surveys that we take at that event, and we have had, by the way, as many as 823 people, mostly kids, at those events. And typically I'll say, how many of you have ever heard a clear presentation of the gospel like this before? And maybe a fourth will raise their hands. I'll say, how many have been here before? And the same fourth will raise their hands. So we feel like we're reaching a segment of the community that's probably not churched that much, and it's just a wonderful opportunity to get the gospel out. So that's one way Broadway is, big way that they've been involved over the years. And then we have, like you said, that third Thursday that you can come down and prepare a dinner or serve a dinner, and you guys have the chapel service that night, and so you can also be involved in that. I know we've over the years had a kind of a rotation where maybe different small groups would come in. Is Dr. Steve Miller still?
He's still here.
I've got to be in his small group. He was one of my teachers at seminary, and I've got to, years ago, met with his small group. And
well, you just a shameless plug. He and I are going to take a trip to Israel in 2024. I bet you're going this year, aren't you?
As my daughter says, I'm jelly. I'm jealous because
you come with us.
I know another church, they've got 80 people going in May, and I'm always saying, put me on the backup list. I'm the warm body that, if you need somebody gets sick and canceled. But
well, anyway, so he's still doing well, and he's still in America.
Incredible, yeah.
So Broadway goes down, and if you're not familiar, this is a great thing for your family or your small group or whatever. I take my family, and I'll bring my guitar, and my son will bring the what do they call them, the bongos or the cajones or whatever, and then my daughter will sing. My 2 daughters will sing, and we'll do the service, and then one of us I'll preach. So we always when we come as a family, we just go as a family, and this is a great ministry we can do together as a family. And so I think on the 20th of this month, my family's taking it, and we're going to be there.
Great.
So tell Robert to make chicken. No.
Well, we'll see what we can do.
Tell Robert to make his famous chicken. But yeah, so it's a great family thing. And what we're just trying to get the word out to Broadway is this is a ministry we want to continue to be involved in. You know, so if anybody says, oh, well, there's not much to do, that's not true. I was telling somebody, it's really up to you. Like if it's your night and your class has the night, or your family, or whatever, it's as much as you want to make that worship service. If you want to lead in singing and do that, if you want to share your testimony with those guys, if you want to preach, look, it doesn't have to be a 3-point Adrian Rogers sermon.
Right.
I mean, these guys are captive, and they'll take anything. So you can cut your teeth preaching.
Well, I was just thinking of the young man who came with the Gross family not too long ago.
Jackson.
What's his last name?
Smith.
Jackson Smith. You know, he has done such a great job down there. He's a young man, and he's preached the gospel down there several times and done a great job. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of young people have, you know, God has worked in their life through Calvary, kind of like he did in yours, evidently. And it's exciting to see. We love all the young people that come in the summer. We have a lot of youth that come in, a couple of youth organizations that visit. We have some choirs that come in. And on our website, we have a calendar. So you can go on there and see who's going to be there.
And what's the name of the website? CalvaryRescueMission.org?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
We'll have that link posted in the notes of the podcast.
And on our Facebook page, you can scroll down through there, Calvary Rescue Mission on Facebook. You'll see you can, you know, do a search there on that page and just put Broadway Baptist Church in, and you'll be surprised how many entries there are. You know, we tell a funny story, and I know I keep getting off
tell your stories.
Well,
tell your stories.
It's a short one, but you know. Jerry Cherry and Susan Cherry and some the Epps, you know, they come down and they have that group called the Hellfighters. And so one year, James, who's retired now, he was just an incredible man of God that we were blessed to have on staff. But James got a little tongue-tied up there introducing them. He called them the Hellraisers.
Yeah. I was going to make that joke if you didn't say it. I was going to say they've changed their name to the Hellraisers.
Yeah, Tim may have to edit that, but
no, that's all good. We're going to leave that in there. The Hellfighters are now the Hellraisers. Yeah, but you know, they've kind of stopped the motorcycle thing that they were doing.
Oh, okay.
Because they said they all are too worn out. I'm not going to say the word old. Well, they said we're just not going to do that anymore.
They went to Sturgis every year. But you know, Garner Owen, I know he went to be with the Lord recently. He was president of our board, so we had representatives.
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
And he was on our board for quite a few years. Tommy Callahan, I noticed, you know,
he passed away
recently. Passed away. Oh, he gave a testimony down there that was just incredible. Tommy Callahan said, I didn't want to be here tonight. You know, I'm embarrassed to say. He said, I know what it's like to have to scrape up $3 to go stay in Pacific Garden Mission in Chicago. And then he talked about how, you know, God worked in his life even though he wasn't saved, and he became one of the vice presidents, I think, of Paul Mitchell, which is a Fortune 500 company. But when he told those guys, he said, when I got to the top, I had houses, I had cars, I had everything. He said, but I was just as miserable as I was down at the bottom. Boy, you talk about jaws dropping and hitting the floor. And then he talked about being 40,000 feet over Kentucky and thinking that plane got in some bad turbulence, you know, the kind where you drop 1,000 feet. And he said something like, oh, Jesus. And believe it or not, that was a God moment in his life. And he came to know Christ and So, gosh, I mean, we had several guys that night that he shared that come to know Christ. Incredible. He was a member here for many years.
In fact, his funeral was just a couple of months ago, I think. That's right. Yeah, and that's sad. I never got to know him because when I came in the middle of COVID, and he was already sick. And so, yeah, but I heard great things.
And I think his sweet wife, widow now, Ramona, is still a member here. Yeah.
So Broadway's involvement's been long and varied, but it's good, and everybody has the opportunity. So to just kind of round this out, how can members continue to serve the rescue mission? What are the needs that you say, man, you know, this is where people really help us? You're building a chapel, so that's one thing. Still raising money for that.
Yeah.
Because again, people don't understand it was all in one building. It was a little bitty building.
Right.
So you built the dorms and the cafeteria first so that men would have a place to stay, and you've just been doing the services in the cafeteria, which is okay.
Right.
But now you're going to have a real live chapel based on that old spot.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I don't think we mentioned it, but we do also now we're doing, you know, we've always had a discipleship program, but now we have Discipleship 1 and Discipleship 2. We had some real fine Christian gentlemen who actually wrote a book on discipleship partly with Calvary in mind, and we use their literature, and some of them come and mentor and teach the guys. We're fixing to start another group up. I think it's a 10 or 12-week program. It'll start again in a couple of Tuesday nights. So for men, there's an opportunity to mentor there. But the best way to become involved really is I'm going to send them to Pastor Mark.
Yeah, send them our way.
You know, what they need to do is get on that list to come on the third Thursday night. Come with a group. And that's a way to get down there, and you find out, hey, you know, it's not so scary down here after all. I can do this. You know, I can come down and help out. And while they're there, they'll find other opportunities. But you can go on our website and look at our monthly newsletter. We do put a list of needs in there. And over the years, that's another way that Broadway has helped us. We've had, you know, various individuals will look at that needs list. Oh, they need coffee. You know, for those guys that got to be out by 6:30 in the morning to get their to-go cups ready on a cold day. And so, you know, people will bring whatever is on that list, whether it be coffee or hamburger meat or whatever. So that's another way. We do a luncheon every first Tuesday. You mentioned Robert and his fried chicken. So we just have one more of those coming up. I don't know when this broadcast will go out, but I think May 2nd will be the last one we'll do for the season, and then we'll start back up in September. Generally, it's first Tuesday, unless it's, you know, right in behind a holiday.
And anybody's welcome to come to that.
Yeah, Miss Hatcher always needs people to help serve. It's mostly ladies, but it can be some men too, but to help serve at the luncheon. And it is the best fried chicken in Memphis, no doubt about it.
Absolutely.
And that's another way to come. We generally, some people come down to Calvary and get a tour, or they'll come down for the luncheon and get a tour. A lot of people come to the luncheon. They'll bring clothes, men's clothes for our clothing room, or they may bring whatever is on our needs list. So, you know, kill a couple of birds in one stone, come down, eat some good fried chicken, and drop off a donation. So those are some of the ways that you can get involved in Calvary. But, you know, again, look at our Facebook page, look at our website, and there's a little history of the Calvary on the website. It's not that long. And there is a calendar so you can see who's coming. And what happens a lot of times, even if it's not Broadway's night, people look at the calendar. Oh, I know them, you know.
So I'm going to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's
I'm going to show up.
Yeah. Just show up.
You meet a lot of people. And again, I want to say this over and over because someone was like, well, our Sunday school class went down there and, you know, we just served a few items of food and there really wasn't much to do. But again, it's what you make it.
Right.
Right. If you just go down there and think, well, I'm just going to slop beans on a plate, yeah, that's not much. But you have the worship service, and you can take that, and you're just there to love people, to be used by God. What are the gifts that God's given you? How can you take those gifts and use them? And this is a great outlet because these are people in our city that need that encouragement. So,
I got a little teary-eyed just now because you made me think about years ago, that same church I mentioned over on the highway in West Memphis. A lady that her husband was a deacon with me there at that church and now has a big construction company over there. But she came that night, and she was just one of those people, had a glow, and she smiled at this man. And we have a time of testimony usually in chapel, and I think it was later that night that he said, "Do you know how long it's been since somebody smiled at me? You know what happens to homeless people on the street? We look away." And she smiled at him, and he said, that meant a lot to me. And, people think, oh, I can't do anything. Well, that meant a lot. A smile is contagious. And I think he smiled when he said that, So, you can make a difference. And you don't have to be rich. But if you're rich in Christ, that does help.
Yeah, I know. Christians can be the worst when it comes to any mission or ministry opportunity. If they don't go and build the Empire State Building and 7 billion people get saved, they don't think they did any work for Jesus. And it's like, okay, you're not always going to conquer the world when you go do ministry. Just go.
Right.
Serve a piece of chicken, smile at somebody, sing a few songs. So what? It didn't make you feel the way you thought it should. Just go and be a servant. Who knows what God will do?
And you never know. Yeah, so many times you'll hear, it might be years later, but you'll hear about a difference you made and you didn't even realize it at the time. So,
absolutely. Well, Brother Bob, we appreciate your ministry and we appreciate your fellowship and relationship with us, and we want it to continue. Amen. And so we want to just get the message out, and that's the purpose of these podcasts. Yeah. The people that are listening, now they know about Calvary Rescue Mission if they didn't already. Right. And now they're hopefully more pumped than ever, and they're going to go and say, I'm taking a Thursday. And our policy is any family, any group can take a Thursday. Yeah. It's the third Thursday of every month, so we go 12 times out of the year. I'm taking my family again in April. Anybody can take a group. And so if it's a Sunday school class, a small group, a discipleship ministry, whatever, go down and minister. And you got to go a few times to kind of get comfortable. Right? Because first time you go, you're like, oh, okay. Go with somebody and just say, I'm just here to watch because I want to come down on my own later and I want to kind of know what to do.
Yeah. And I'm sure you know this story by now, but I had a funeral down the way here, and I said, I'm just going to stop by Broadway. It was during spring break. I said, man, the office may be closed, but I'm going to stop by. And I met Keena Sims, I believe. Timms, I'm sorry.
Keena Timms, that's right.
And I met Tim, and so...
Now, her doppelganger is Tina Sims, but her real name is Keena Sims.
Keena, yeah.
Wait, now I'm confused. What is it? All right. Anyway, go ahead. Keena Timms.
Yeah. Well, her husband schooled me on the pronunciation of that because is it Keena or is it Keena? No, it rhymes with Tina, but it's Keena.
And she's our secretary here at the
So I'm going to quote him. Yeah. So I talked to her and Tim. They were so nice to me, and I'm thinking, I'm being rude. I'm just dropping in. And so they took my number, and I kind of thought to myself, I probably won't hear anything back from them.
Because you needed somebody to fill in for Thursday.
Mean, it was very short notice. I think that was a Tuesday, and it was coming up that Thursday, and I'm like, they don't know me. And so, later I get a phone call from Keena, and she said, well, my husband's a deacon at another church, and he can give a message, and the kids and I sing, and one of them, I think, played the piano, and et cetera, et cetera. And I was just astounded. But, they just jumped in there at the last minute and took that night because there had been a cancellation or something. And so,
And to cap that story off, like what, 4 or 5 men professed Christ that night.
Absolutely. It was a
mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was cool. It's really cool.
So, yeah, so we're just so thankful. So any family can do that. Who knows what God will do.
And the headmaster at North Point Christian School is
Jim Ferguson.
Jim Ferguson. What a great man of God, and he's been down to Calvary several times and preached some beautiful messages. There's another man I'm thinking of who I think he used to be a coach, and he may be the city attorney for Olive Branch or one of the.
Oh, you're talking about Brian Dye.
Brian Dye. That's my man, Brian. Oh, gosh. Man, I love his messages. So, man, I'm just thinking of so many people from Broadway that have come down, done a great job down there. And like you said, we want to get more and get some of the new members involved as well.
Yeah, so we hope that happens.
Yeah.
All right, well, on that note, we're out. Thank you, Brother Bob.
Thank you.